He noticed her tears before he ever heard her voice. In the noisy hum of the city cafe, with laughter echoing from groups of friends and the clinking of cups filling the air, she sat alone by the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a half-empty cup of tea that had long since gone cold. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't making a scene. Instead, her tears fell silently, as if she had practiced crying without sound for years. It was the kind of crying that didn't demand attention, but deserved it more than anything. He couldn't ignore it. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of human connection to change lives, please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Hopeful Stories. Every small click helps us spread more stories that remind the world that compassion is never wasted. He was a single dad, used to juggling too many responsibilities at once. School drop-offs, overtime shifts, grocery lists, and bedtime stories. His life rarely left space for noticing strangers, but that day was different. Maybe it was the way her quiet sorrow filled the room with something heavier than noise. Maybe it was because he had known loneliness himself, the kind that squeezes your chest at night when there's no one around to hear. Or maybe it was because his daughter, Emma, often asked why people seemed sad in ways children couldn't understand. He thought of her curious little face, and he imagined her saying, "Daddy, why didn't you help her?" So he asked. With careful words and a voice gentler than usual, he approached her table. He expected her to look up defensively, to shake her head, to say she was fine. But instead, she flinched slightly, as though his kindness itself was a foreign thing. And then, with the smallest nod, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't think anyone would notice." Her name was Layla. She was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s, but her eyes looked decades older, as though she had carried burdens that had aged her faster than time should have. She spoke slowly, haltingly, as though measuring how much truth she could safely release to a stranger. He listened without interrupting, letting her broken pauses fill the air, because sometimes silence is the only language pain understands. She told him she had once been married. She had once believed in the warmth of promises, in the safety of shared dreams. But her husband had left, suddenly, cruelly, and without explanation that made sense. One morning, he kissed her on the forehead as if everything were normal, and that night he didn't return home. He left her not just with unanswered questions, but with a debt he had hidden, bills stacked high enough to bury her peace. And worst of all, he left her with guilt. Guilt for not seeing it coming, guilt for not being enough to make him stay, guilt for breathing when he had decided to live without her. At first, she tried to keep her head above water. She worked double shifts. She sold belongings that had once held sentimental value. She hid her struggles from her parents, too ashamed to admit that the love they had celebrated at her wedding had crumbled so fast. But shame, she said, was heavier than any financial burden. Shame pushed her into isolation, until her friends stopped calling, assuming her silence meant she no longer cared. Now, she confessed, the tears weren't just about the past. They were about the future that terrified her. She was 2 months behind on rent. Her job barely covered groceries. She lived in fear of eviction, in fear of starting over yet again, in fear that the life she had dreamed of, family, stability, joy, was a dream no one intended for her. The single dad sat there, shaken by how much of her pain felt familiar. Different circumstances, perhaps, but familiar in essence. He too had once known what it was like to lose someone unexpectedly, to be left holding both grief and responsibility in the same trembling hands. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving him to raise Emma on his own. There had been nights he thought he wouldn't make it. Nights he had cried silently after putting his daughter to bed. Nights he had stared at the ceiling wondering why life had chosen him for such cruel lessons. And yet, here he was. Not thriving, perhaps, but surviving. And Emma was thriving, because he had chosen to fight for her childhood, to give her love even when his own heart was fractured. As he listened to Layla, he realized something profound. Survival is not just about yourself. Sometimes, it's It's about becoming the person who reminds someone else that they are not invisible, not unworthy, not destined to drown alone. He told her softly that pain is not weakness. That tears, even the silent ones, are proof of endurance. He told her about Emma, about how children see the world with eyes unclouded by judgment, how they believe in happy endings because they haven't yet learned to doubt them. And he told her something he rarely admitted to anyone, that his daughter was the reason he got out of bed on mornings when grief had pressed too heavily on his chest. For the first time that day, Layla smiled faintly. It wasn't a wide or carefree smile, but it was something fragile and real, like a candle lit in darkness. And in that moment, the single dad knew this wasn't about pity. It was about recognition. Two broken souls had collided by chance, and in each other's stories, they found the echo of their own survival. Days turned into weeks, and though he hadn't planned it, he began seeing her more often. Sometimes it was at the café, sometimes on the park bench where she read books to distract herself from worries. Sometimes she brought old photographs, as if to prove to herself that she had once been happy. He didn't push. He didn't rescue. He simply sat with her, talked with her, and shared his own imperfect story. Emma, with her curious and fearless heart, soon joined in too, asking Layla questions about her favorite colors, her favorite childhood memory, whether she liked ice cream more than cake. Slowly, laughter began to return to moments Layla thought would only ever hold sadness. The single dad realized something even deeper. Often, what saves us isn't grand gestures or miracles. It's being seen. It's being asked, "Why are you crying?" and being given space to answer. It's the quiet companionship that reminds you that even broken pieces can fit together to form something beautiful. But life is never a straight path. Just as Layla was starting to find her footing again, she received an eviction notice. Her landlord had grown impatient, and she had only days to figure out where to go. The panic returned, heavier than before, and she almost disappeared into silence again. But this time, she wasn't alone. The single dad stepped in, not as a savior, but as a friend. He offered her the spare room in his small apartment, just until she could get back on her feet. At first, she refused, pride and fear battling within her. But then she remembered the kindness in Emma's eyes, the nights of shared stories, the simple truth that sometimes accepting help is an act of courage, not weakness. She said yes. Those weeks under the same roof transformed all of them. Emma adored having Layla around, asking her to braid her hair or read bedtime stories. Layla, in turn, rediscovered joy in small acts. Cooking a meal, sharing laughter at the dinner table, tucking a child into bed with warmth she thought she'd lost forever. And the single dad, he began to feel a lightness he hadn't felt in years, a reminder that hearts can heal even after they've been shattered. One night, as Layla sat quietly after putting Emma to bed, he noticed her eyes were wet again. But this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, of disbelief that life could turn from emptiness to belonging in such unexpected ways. When he asked her why she was crying now, she whispered, "Because for the first time in so long, I feel like I'm home." Friends, if this story touched your heart even a little, please don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who may need hope today, and subscribe to Hopeful Stories. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind people of the power of kindness, resilience, and second chances. And before we close, tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment when someone's kindness changed everything for you? We'd love to hear your story, because in the end, what began as one man asking about a stranger's quiet tears became a reminder to all of us. Sometimes the smallest act of noticing can be the spark that saves a life.